Circus Day to many of us was one of the most magical days in summer. From the arrival of the circus train to the parade to the setting up of the big top, most of us were fascinated by the wonder of it all. Roy Lee Harmon could never have afforded a ticket to the circus if it hadn't been for a little ingenuity and a lot of elbow grease. See how Roy earned his own way on those old-time circus days.
I was fortunate. I was born deep in the West Virginia hills in the year 1900. We had no daily newspapers, radio was yet to be discovered, there were not picture shows or modern-type recreation. Maybe recreation was better then. We had such things as all-day meetings with dinner on the grounds, corn shucking, apple peelings, house raisings, baseball, and visits to the cane mills which made sorghum molasses in the fall. We were happy and carefree. Families were closely knit. Our family lived in the little town of Danville, West Virginia, population somewhere around 200 to 250. We knew very little about teeming cities or city ways, and cared less. Farming was the chief occupation in those days before the advent of coal mining, which left a sorry heritage of slag piles and coal dust. The air was clean and sweet. The hills, with the exception of some rich new grounds, were covered with timber, mostly virgin stands of timber. People dug their living from the rich soil. Everybody went to church, the one church in the town. Doors were not locked at night. Nobody had ever gotten mugged. The first automobile had not chugged its way into those hills. There was peacefulness and serenity unmatched all during my early boyhood years. The big event of the year, outside of Christmas, was Circus Day. All the tinsel and glitter of the fabulous circus world was brought to us on that one hallowed day each summer, and we reveled in it. The circus usually came to town after the corn crop was laid by, after it was plowed and hoed for the last time, and there was a temporary lull in farming activities, time to go fishing or swimming, time to play baseball, and just one precious, glorious day to attend the circus. From the time I was 8 or 10 years old until I was 16, I saw every circus that arrived in Danville or nearby Madison, and I never had to spend a dime. I worked my way in. Money was scarce, and I guess I was what the old-timers called work brittle. I remember vividly that it was hard to get to sleep on the night before the circus. I knew that an hour or two before daylight the circus train would arrive, glide onto the railroad switch just below the tiny depot, and start to unload and set up for the afternoon and evening shows. I was usually at the depot when the wail of the show's train whistle was heard as it rounded the curve at Hopkins, a flag stop a mile or more below town. Circuses were extremely well organized in those days. I guess they had to be, and I wonder when the workers got any sleep. Maybe a few hours on the train. I've also seen them lying asleep and unperturbed just outside the big tent as the afternoon big show ended. The circus train was barely stopped on the siding when there was a great stir, and men and horses, sometimes elephants too, got busy unloading the gaudy circus wagons and hauling them to the nearby show lot in the middle of town. The cook tent went up first, and hot cakes, eggs, and sausages with great cauldrons of strong coffee were soon ready for the workers, who ate greedily and hurriedly, and then resumed their hurried activities. There was canvas to be placed and raised, and big stakes to be driven with heavy sledgehammers. The sideshow tent went up quickly, too. I was usually in the midst of it all, looking for a job, which I always found, a job which would earn me a coveted ticket to the main show in the afternoon. Once a fellow in a sideshow was having wash day, and he employed me. All morning, I scurried down to the river and back carrying water. About noon, I received my precious ticket. Another time, a group of my friends, boys without money, but possessed of an ingrown yen to see the show, joined me in carrying the boards and putting up the general admission and reserve seats. We finished just before noon, but wouldn't dream of going home to eat lunch. The man who hired us told us to wait there until he came back with the tickets. After an hour of waiting, which seemed much longer, some of the smaller lads were almost ready to cry. All of us were afraid we'd been cheated, afraid the man would never come back to give us those cherished, precious tickets. The parade went on, and the bands played. Farm horses hitched to buggies or hitching posts reared in fright and tried to run away. There was excitement galore. The parade ended, and still we had no tickets. We didn't even know the name of the man who hired us, and we were desperate indeed. Finally, the opening strains came from the band inside the Big Top, and it seemed we might really miss the show. But at long last, our employer returned and gave us our tickets. We promptly stampeded toward the tent entrance, wiggled through the crowd, and into the magic and splendor of the big tent to find seats. On another occasion, I got a job carrying water to fill up the tanks where the sea lions in a sideshow cavorted. I've never liked sea lions since. As soon as I panted my way to the tank and poured in 2 big buckets of water, the sea lions would get playful and slop most of it out. At times, it looked like a losing battle, but I persisted until the sideshow closed just before the main event was to go on in the Big Top. I got my ticket and quickly forgot my blistered hands and my weary body. I had spent half a day toting water, but the prize was a ticket I would not have sold for love or money. Looking back on it all now, I wonder if I didn't enjoy the glamour and glory of Circus Day once a year just a little more because I worked so hard to get a ticket. Maybe if I'd been handed a reserved seat ticket while dressed in my Sunday go-to-meeting clothes, I would have been slightly bored or adopted the silly attitude of someone who said, "When you've seen one circus, you've seen 'em all." That just isn't true, and I had the youthful blisters and calluses to prove it. Every year the circus was a brand new adventure.
While the circus held great attraction for country kids, Wild West shows were equally fascinating to city kids. G.W. Freeman, a red-haired youngster from St. Louis, had the opportunity to run across 2 famous representatives of the Old West. Both were Native Americans. One had seen his better days while the other was still a youngster. The story takes place one summer before the turn of the 20th century, as G.W. relates the story of Geronimo's Rope.
I hadn't thought of Geronimo in years until the other day someone spoke of a song called Geronimo's Cadillac. Then, suddenly, I was 12 years old again when for a wonderful few weeks I saw the famous old Apache, Geronimo, nearly every day. Maybe the shock and grief at the end of it all had blocked the whole thing out of my memory. It began one summer morning when I opened our front door on Washington Boulevard in St. Louis and caught sight, down on the curb, of what looked like a sure-enough cowboy. I got down the steps in nothing flat, hunkered down beside the man, and said, "Hello, are you a cowboy?" "Well, you could say I keep aiming at it." He grinned at me, more with his eyes than his mouth. "Say, do these folks next door to you ever get up?" I told him they'd just moved in, and all I'd seen of them was a girl about my age. "She looked kind of pretty," I said, "only she was wearing something that looked like knickers, about like mine." "No knickers," the man said. "It's a divided skirt. That girl's going to be a rider, and you don't fool around with horses in ruffles and lace." Then he told me about our neighbors. The father was Colonel Zach Mulhall, livestock agent for the Rock Island Railroad, but what he liked to do best was to put on Wild West shows. "He's got another daughter, Lucille," the man went on. "She's about 18, and she's great. The only cowgirl in the country who can rope, throw, and tie a wild steer." "Yep," the cowboy said. "I want to get me a job in this show he's putting on. Crazy as it sounds, I just won $1,000 in a calf roping contest." He stopped to share the fun with me. "Easiest $1,000 I'll ever make in my life. Somebody gave my name to Colonel Mulhall, and he sent transportation for me in Comanche, my pony." "Gee," I said, "I hope you get the job." Just then, somebody raised a window shade next door, and the cowboy stood up and put the little piece of rope he'd been fiddling with back in his pocket. "Stick around," he said. "You ought to know your neighbors." Then, "What's your name?" he asked as we came to the Mulhall steps. "Willard," I said, "and I hate it." "Well, what do the kids at school call you? Red, probably?" His voice sounded hopeful. "Strawberry," I blurted it out, and I felt my face getting burning hot. The cowboy didn't laugh, probably because the mole hall's door opened then right in front of us. The grown-up girl standing there had to be the one named Lucille, the whole country's champion cowgirl. "This is your neighbor Bill," the cowboy told her, "and I'm here to see Colonel Mulhall." "I know," the girl said, "and I'm to take you right down to the lot." "Mildred," she called out then, "here's company." So Mildred showed up then with a tall, husky Mexican girl who had a lot to say about all the stuff she was making for a hope chest. It seemed pretty silly talk to me, and I decided to get out of there. As I was leaving, Mildred asked me if I could ride a horse, and I said, sure. Hadn't I ridden to school all the time out in Missouri? And then, the last minute, that girl said something that brought me up short. "This ought to be a good show. Geronimo's in it." Geronimo? Just the sound of the great Apache warrior's name must have thrilled every man and boy in the country. I had a sneaking idea that if I could only see him, a little bit of his daring and bravery might rub off on me. "You'll see him on your father's show," I said. "Lucky you." "Not up close, I can tell you. He scares me to death. His eyes look so angry and cruel." "You mean you think you'd like it?" "What's liking got to do with it? A great hero like Geronimo?" Well, I went out of there thinking Mildred Mulhall didn't have much sense. Next morning, there was nobody sitting out on the curb, and the house next door was shut up tight. But I had a pretty good idea where Colonel Mulhall would be putting on his show, and I took a streetcar out that way. When I got off the car, I didn't have to ask directions of anybody. You could feel where the excitement was. Then you could hear shouts and galloping, and you could smell the horses in the dust. I walked up to a place like an arena, and I sat down at the edge of it, watching. I don't think I moved the whole morning. I saw Lucille ride out. I saw her rope one of those steers, lay him on the ground, slide off her horse like water running downhill, and tie him up. All it seemed in just seconds. After a while, a lot of cowboys did the same thing, and I could pick out my cowboy, the one I'd seen out front yesterday. I thought he was the best of any of them, and when he came over, I told him that. "These fellows are all good," he said. "They earned their living at it. But just wait till you see Geronimo." Then he uncoiled the rope he had hugged tight under his arm and began to twirl it in loops, maybe 3 or 4 feet across. He kept feeding out the rope until there was a circle big enough to hold him and a horse. "Keeping the feel of the rope," he called it. He showed me how bouncing a loop off the ground could catch an animal's legs. Just then, people everywhere began to draw back from the arena. In a sudden flash, a strange, colorful figure rode up to Colonel Mulhall, and all around me there was a whisper, "Geronimo." Both men raised a hand in greeting. Then the white man drew back to the sidelines as the Apache began to pay out his rope. But instead of signaling for the steer as the other ropers had done, the chief spurred his horse, threw his rope in the air, and kept it madly whirling as he circled the arena in a wild gallop. Nobody noticed when the steer was sent in, but a perfect throw had the animal on the ground, and the chief had pulled the string tight. Then Geronimo stood there, arms aloft, accepting cheers and applause. Not grateful, simply proud. I'd never forget it. No one could. Night after night I dreamed of Geronimo's successes, and day after day I took the streetcar out to the lot to watch. When the cowboy wasn't working, he was showing me how to use the rope, how to bounce it off the ground, how to hop into a spinning circle and out again, always repeating, "You have to keep everlastingly at it." He surely did. I never saw him with idle hands. The opening of the show loomed up, and one golden day Lucille said to me, "Bill, your cowboy friend says you can ride. Would you like to ride in the grand entry? It would give Mildred a partner of her own size." Like to do it. I managed to gulp and say, "Yes, ma'am, but I haven't any horse." "You can ride mine," Lucille said. "I don't ride until the last, alongside Father. Rehearsal tomorrow." Sometime again I'd like to feel as high as I did that next afternoon when I stood beside Mildred as the lineup began to form. By the time Lucille brought her horse up to where I stood, Mildred was already mounted. "Just remember, Bill," Lucille said very definitely, "this pony has a really tender mouth. Never, never pull on him." I swung into the saddle just as the band let out its music, but never had I felt anything like this animal that was under me. He was bridle-wise, sure, ready to respond to the lightest touch of the reins, but maybe nobody had told him about me or music. Anyway, I felt him gather himself together with two evident ideas: to get rid of me and to get out of there. I just plain shrieked, "Lucille, Lucille, what did I do?" In that very second, Lucille was there and leading her horse away. I was on the ground, hearing someone below, "Get that kid out of there!" And Mildred, chin up and looking straight ahead, rode in alone. Yet neither shame nor disgrace could keep me next day from the opening. At least I'd see Geronimo again. My cowboy came on early, and then came over once more to sit beside me on the sidelines and tell me everybody made a fool out of himself every now and then. Once more, the same old excitement built up as Geronimo rode in. The speed and verve of his dashing circle about the arena held its same thrill. Maybe this time Geronimo would break his own record. But as the flying rope settled around the steer and the critter struggled against it, that rope snapped and broke. For a dreadful second, Geronimo sat rigid. There was a movement beside me. Then, into that awful silence, rode my cowboy. He held one of his own ropes out and stood there, soft-talking for a long minute. Then I heard his voice clear and plain. "Why don't you give your rope to the kid?" The fury went out of the tired old face, and the rope came sailing to my outstretched hands. I caught it in the air. The show went on. Geronimo probably roped his calf, but I didn't even hear the music of the grand finale. I had the treasure of my life. My secret dread of our coming move to Atlanta, just one more move for the family of a consulting engineer, turned into serene confidence. Red hair and all, I could face a new school. Nobody there, probably nobody else in the world, would have Geronimo's own rope. I packed that rope myself, coiling it reverently in the bottom of my trunk for the coming trip. I would keep it forever. But when in Atlanta I got ready to show off my treasure, it was gone. "Mother," I shouted, "my rope, did you unpack it?" "No, Willard," my mother said. "That dirty old rope, I couldn't pack clean clothes in next to it. I threw it out." Nothing, I was sure, would ever make up for the shock and pain of that loss. My greatest treasure, gone forever. Yet I find now that what's clearest in my memory isn't my loss, nor even the bitter old Apache who almost broke into a smile as he tossed me a broken rope. It was a cowboy who wanted people around him to be enjoying themselves, and who kept everlastingly at it all over America. It was a cowboy named Will Rogers.
By the way, the song Geronimo's Cadillac mentioned early in the story was written following Geronimo's appearance at the invitation of the President at the 1904 St. Louis Exposition. At the World's Fair, the warrior rode in a horseless carriage, a Cadillac, for the first time, inspiring the song. In the beginning of this collection of memories, we talked about the importance of the front porch to the home and family back in the good old days. But there was another porch often included on those old-fashioned homes of the past. Mary G. remembers those special rooms well and relates her experiences on sleeping porches.
Tourists who drive down the highway or browse through the countryside of rural East Texas may be unaware of the sharp changes made in homes in the past half-century. During the 1930s and 40s, most houses had a sleeping porch attached. Some covered the entire rear of the house. Others were simply a small enclosure on the side or front, covered with screen and magically transformed into an outdoor sleeping porch. When my family moved to a new location, my parents had no difficulty in assigning my sister and me to a 15 by 18-foot sleeping porch. A double bed, which easily accommodated 2 growing girls, was installed. Each side of the room was furnished with a small dressing table and a chest of drawers. These chests were created by stacking 3 vegetable boxes together and covering the top with heavy cardboard or maybe a scrap of plywood cut to fit. Dressing tables, handmade by my grandfather, were for our combs, brushes, mirrors, and other items we thought essential to our health and beauty. The chairs were small nail kegs turned upside down, padded with heavy cotton, and covered with blue printed material, sacks that had once held feed for cows or chickens. From time to time we had rag rugs by the bedside. Mother used scraps from her sewing to braid rugs we thought as beautiful as the oriental ones sold in the stores. Closet space was allotted us, but unlike the burgeoning wardrobes of today's youngsters, we always had extra space. East Texas winters are cold enough that livestock are usually protected by a barn or lean-to shelter where they can huddle together to escape frequent spells of bitter cold. We followed their example by snuggling under the covers and were well protected from the elements. A brick, warmed by fireplace coals, was wrapped in old paper and towels, making an excellent foot warmer. During a hard, blowing rain, the canvas sides would come loose from their fasteners and flap against the wood and screen framework. If the wind didn't blow too briskly, they stayed securely. From the porch we could see and hear eerie sights and sounds. On other nights the moonlight would cast shadows, and from the darkened room, in our imagination, we saw ghosts, animals, witches, and dragons. Shadows formed small pockets of lighter images, and as the moon moved across the sky in its nightly orbit, our imagination turned these into claws of wolves or wildcats. In summer, we bask in the cool night breezes. Smells of honeysuckle, 4 o'clocks, and small climbing wild roses gave our porch such a magical air we often lay awake and made believe we were on a luxury liner crossing the ocean. Croaking frogs, fireflies, and occasionally a night owl screeching from a nearby tree were our summer concert. Our country was less violent then, and even though we were only a few hundred feet from the main public road, we had no qualms about sleeping unprotected. We got plenty of fresh air and were healthy, relaxed youngsters. Each of us had our own special memories, but sharing the good times and the bad is an experience we cherish.
All of these memories of summer times back in the good old days reminds me of a letter I received back in 1993 from Blanche Passa. Blanche remembered the good times in those days and asserted to me, "I want to go back. I want to go back just one more time. I want to come down the stairway in the early morning and smell the coffee perking merrily. I want to catch the faint aroma of oatmeal bubbling in a big family-sized kettle and taste the thick-cut homemade bread toasted over red-hot coals glowing inside the open lid of the old Blue Range. I want to enjoy the taste of butter made from the cream from our very own cow, thickly spread and melted just right into the warm toast. Let me again experience that special Sunday morning when Daddy served the tenderloin from our own butchered calf. Daddy fried the meat himself, making sure that each member of his family got a fair share of the treat after each came down the stairs for breakfast, tempted by the delicious smells that permeated upward. I want to go to a home talent show in the community hall and laugh as many folks perform their various antics. I want to hear Sylvia and Winnie play a duet on the piano, watch Ira do a tap dance, and hear the sweet strains as Donna, Jeanette, and Pat harmonize as they are so ably accompanied by their mother. I want to go to the Christmas program and hear the Honorable Jack Halcrow make his usual announcement that Santa is poor this year, or hear him tell at Sunday school that now each class will recite their golden text. I want to go to the school barn to help Rosanna harness the horse and hook it up to the cutter that will carry her and her siblings home after school. I want our whole family to drive out to the Bill Lyle farm to spend a lovely Sunday afternoon. The snowbanks were much bigger then, perhaps because there were no shelter belts. And if we didn't have a sled, we'd slide down the big banks on a piece of cardboard from a packing box. How about a game of Run Sheep Run with all the kids in the town participating and the whole town as a playing field? Or a softball game in the schoolyard with the kids from town playing against the kids from the country schools? Remember how much fun it was at that big end-of-the-year school picnic? I want to return to the time when life was much simpler. Different were the times when Saturdays, our one big night of the week, were spent driving to the next town to take in a movie. Weeknights were wonderful, just going to a friend's house to make popcorn or a batch of fudge. Yes, I want to return, but then again, no, I can't go back, even for a moment. For if I did, I would surely want to stay. Well, that's all the time we have. I hope you've enjoyed this look at those summer times past in the good old days. This is Ken Tate, editor of Good Old Days magazine, reminding you to always remember the best.